Hi, this is Kyle Deering,
And Emily Clifton.
reporting for V News. There has been a rampant debate going on in Miss Auble's American history class on why students should be taught the Civil War.
This debate has sparked many discussions and arguments. We're going to Caitlin Benson with Mr. Hopkinson on his opinion.
Okay, if I was to come up with some causes for the American Civil War, I'd probably go with abolitionists, different economies, southern states wanted more power, and the election, that dreaded election of 1860, and aliens. Blamed for everything. Believe me, mostly the aliens.
Now we head over to Ashley with Mr. Eisen.
Alright, notice I was asked to talk about the causes of the Civil War. There's a lot of specific causes to the Civil War, but there's also some that actually start since the colonial times, so the founding of our country. Talking about religion and the geography of America, especially on the Atlantic coast. And it just kept getting worse and worse in terms of different differences in the economy in the North and the South. Originally, the North became industrialized, South was more agrarian, and they depended on slavery more after the Cotton Gin, and it led to the expansion of slavery when it was just about to die out. And then as people started moving west, different territories wanted to become states, and one of them was Missouri. They wanted to become a state, and they wanted to have slaves. However, they didn't want to upset the balance in the legislative branch between slaveholding and freeholding states. So they came with the Missouri Compromise that said Missouri could be added to the Union, slaveholding state, and then Massachusetts would be split in half essentially, and the new state would be added of Maine, and that would be a freeholding state, keeping the balance. And then that was good for a little bit in terms of quieting everything down in terms of the debate over the issue of slavery, or at least the expansion of it, because really both sides were getting something out of it. The South was making money exporting cotton, and the North was producing finished products with cotton. So everybody was kind of okay with it for a while for the most part in terms of the economic part of it. And then as more people started moving west, capitalize on free land, or cheap land out there, new territories started becoming states, and a couple was Kansas, Nebraska, and they kind of went against the Missouri Compromise in a way, and those territories said they were going to vote on the issue of slavery, or whether that should happen or not. A lot of people moved into the area that, not necessarily moved, but they went there to vote on the issue, even if they didn't live there. Led to riots, and especially in Kansas, a lot of people were injured or killed, and that became known as Bleeding Kansas. So that just showed you the hatred on both sides of the issue between the North and the South.
Now we go to my colleague Emily Clifton with the principal of Verrado High School, Mr. Huffman.
So I think the Civil War should be taught to students in school for a lot of reasons. First of all, there's this old saying that says those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it, and I believe that's true. The Civil War is a big part of what led our country to be what our country is. If you look at some of our amendments, the 14th Amendment, which gives natural-born citizens, or people born in this country, to be citizens, those type debates continue today, and I think that the deeper the understanding is, the stronger people's knowledge base is, and it makes it easier to understand what's going on. If you look at the 15th Amendment that gives people the right to vote, that if we're a democracy and we all need to have input on how this country is run and some of the decisions that are made as well. One of the things that I've heard you guys talk about in regards to the things that came out after the Civil War, not only the changes in the Southern economy, but things like segregation, the KKK. To me, the KKK is the closest thing I can compare them to right now is ISIS. Is there were people that had, I think, a misguided belief system to begin with, but then there are people that take a misguided belief system and take that to a whole nother totally crazy level. And I think you can make that comparison that there could be some similarities there. That hating people just because of who they are.
We're going to switch gears and head over to Kyle Deering with his grandfather, Dan Deering, to get an opinion outside of Verrado.
Hi, my name's Dan. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Civil War and its impact on America and some of the things that took place, some of the highlights of the Civil War. I am a student of history. I enjoy it. You are bound to repeat it if you do not study it. I think it's important that students understand the difference between just learning facts about a particular subject, but try to understand the impact that the Civil War had on our economy and a way of life, more importantly. Well, what started it? There's a lot of consideration on both sides. Perhaps the most poignant and the most discussed is the idea of slavery. Slavery was not the primary issue. Slavery had been a part of our country for many, many years prior to the Civil War. Abolitionists in the North said it's wrong. We should not enslave people. Black people were even considered property and traded like mules and slaves. How did this affect the economy of the South? They needed that work. They were an agricultural society that did not have the horsepower, the manpower to do the job. And in fact, most of the Southern whites would refuse to even do the work that the blacks would do. This was a problem. The North was industrialized. It had factories, and it had production, and it had the railroads, and it had all the things an economic power should have. Meanwhile, the South, depending on its agricultural background, was dependent upon slavery and the slave trade. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation, thought of by President Lincoln, was a profound step in the direction of the abolition of slavery. Let's get rid of slavery. Well, this didn't sit well with a lot of the Southern folks. Even some freed slaves that had come down from the North to the South to try to help the slaves escape. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, runaway slaves were treated like criminals. They were hunted down, shackled, shot, whipped, beat. One of the most famous people that ran an underground railroad was Harriet Tubman. She had managed to escape. She had gone to the North and could have lived her life in virtual safety and freedom. But she decided that it was her duty, her job, to go back into the South and to help as many slaves as she could to escape the enslavement, obviously, of what they were living with in the South. The Underground Railroad developed, and it was not literally a railroad. It was merely a group of people that came together and said, if you can get that slave from Tennessee to North Carolina to Virginia and into Pennsylvania, we'll get them to New York and Ohio, and we'll get them safe from there. So it was a tremendous amount of cooperation of a lot of people, actually, to make this an event. Well, how did the war get started? Well, another thing that the South didn't like was said, all the power is in Washington, D.C. All the power is in the North. We're going to secede from the Union. We don't like what Washington is doing. We have the right to secede. We're going to form the Confederate States of the United States, the Confederate States of America. We're going to print our own money, raise our own army and militia, and we're going to run things the way they think they should be done. Well, it didn't sit too well with the North and the politicians in power. So what happened then? Well, the first shots were fired, some volleys exchanged. General Lee had his Army of Virginia. Grant was about to become kind of a household name in the North. In fact, before he got the job as Commander-in-Chief of all the U.S. forces, or all the Northern forces, he had a meeting with President Lincoln. And Lincoln was really undecided whether he wanted to have Grant, the cigar-smoking, whiskey-drinking, rebel, or kind of a guy that would not normally lead itself to be a great political leader, but was probably a pretty good warrior. Well, Antietam, one of the bloodiest days in American history and in Civil War. In one single day, the South lost more troops. Thousands and thousands of people were killed on both sides. But eventually, the North, from their advantaged position, were able to rout the Southern Army and send them back into Virginia. They didn't pursue. Whether they thought, well, we've whipped them and they won't be back. Well, they did come back. All right? Well, how did they get back? Brings us to Gettysburg. Gettysburg is perhaps Lincoln's downfall or his best day. Historians are undecided about that. They can't really determine whether the victory at Gettysburg was indeed a victory for the North and its way of life and an end of the war. To Lincoln, it was the saddest day of his life. And of course, he wrote the Gettysburg Address. And in his address, he spoke not as a victory, but as a melancholy what this Union needed to do to put itself back together. He felt very strongly about that. One of the highlights of Gettysburg, actually, it was perhaps the turning point of the war, because Lee had taken his army into Pennsylvania. He was going to attack northern soil again. Well, why did he want to do that? What was so important that he go there and do that? To prove a point, or to make his way all the way to Washington, D.C.? Well, what had happened in the meantime, Grant and his army and a group of generals under his command had literally overtaken the whole Mississippi River. They had worked their way all the way down into New Orleans, and thereby capturing the southern ports, shutting off their imports, and virtually strangling the South to get their supplies they needed to continue the war. So it was kind of a trade-off. Lee was thinking, you did this to us, we're going to do this to you. What was the great folly of Gettysburg? Pickett's charge. The Union troops were stationed on Cemetery Ridge, high above the Confederate line. Well, the Confederates said, we can take this. We take that ridge, and we have won this battle, basically in winning the war. Didn't happen. Pickett's charge led wave after wave after wave of Confederate troops across an open field, only to be massacred by the Union Army. That was indeed a turning point. These are some things that occurred, just some very basic things. We could talk about General McClellan and how he found favor with Lincoln and was placed in charge of his whole army division, only to discover that he was a great supply clerk, but he was a terrible general. Many, many mistakes made on both sides. Ultimate result, of course, the North did win the war. So in April 1865, Lee did indeed surrender to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse.
As you can see, heat is rising in these debates. Now we're going to head over to our reporter Caitlin Benson with a student inside of Ms. Aubel's classroom to see what he thinks.
So what happened during the war was pretty interesting. The war started because Fort Sumter and had like these people, Confederates, who like bombed the entire place, and it was really, really bad. Like, not too many people died, but it was really dropped the morale of people, the Union, who were working for Sumter. After that came Bull Run, or First Battle of Manassas, and the Confederacy massed troops on the border, and the Union went to go meet them. And it was really bad for both sides, because although the Confederacy won, both sides realized that war was going to suck. War was going to be the worst thing that absolutely happened. And the people who brought picnic baskets and little blankets and sat down there, they kind of realized that too, so they never did it. It was just, you know, the black regiments. Sorry, just reading up this list. These were also kind of a turning point in the war, because during the Emancipation Proclamation, people were like, hey, you guys are manpower, we need manpower to fight, why not let you guys in? But you guys get white captains, crappy guns, crappy uniforms. It's basically really, really segregated, kind of like until the 1960s was. That's kind of like what it was like. And then we have our favorite general, Robert E. Lee, probably one of the greatest military minds of the 1860s. And he join the Southern Confederacy, which didn't have Lincoln. Good for us, I suppose.
For our final interview, we go back to Ashley with a student who has not yet taken Miss Auble's American History course.
I believe that students should be taught about the American Civil War because it abolished slavery with the 13th Amendment. It reunified the country after the war, of course. It was the most bloody war in American history. And also that pretty good President Abe Lincoln was assassinated because of the reason, because he believed and stood up for something that he believed in and changed the world. So one man can change the world.
As you can see, this controversial debate will continue to rage on.
We will keep you updated.
But for now, this has been Kyle Deering
And Emily Clifton.
reporting for V News.